Welcome, everybody, to this week's podcast episode for the Financial Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu. And as you know, I talk about 4 different types of freedom: time, financial, location, health freedom. And in that light, I'm always scouring the globe, connecting with entrepreneurs, thought leaders, picking their brains, recording them, and sharing their insights with the world. So today we have a special guest. His name is Connor Boyack, and he's an author, he's a public speaker, he's a TV show producer, podcaster, and a libertarian. So what's this episode is going to be a fantastic conversation. It's going to be all about the educational system, freedom, um, being in control of your own destiny, and I'll let him describe his background and upbringing. So Connor, welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate being on here with you.
Yeah. Um, I'm a libertarian myself, and tell us more about yourself and how you got started, and we'll go from there.
So I'm what I like to call a full-time freedom fighter. I all day long get to try and solve problems for people and remove laws and regulations and things that are in their way, whether it's a small business owner or a family, just trying to help people embrace and understand the power of having more freedom. So I run a nonprofit. We change laws. We partner with elected officials across the country and get laws changed at a state and local level. And I've been doing that for about 11 years. And along the way, I've written 37 books, I think, sold millions of copies. I think we're almost at 5 million copies now. Created a kids cartoon show. And so the books that I'm most known for are the Tuttle Twins books, which help parents talk to their kids about entrepreneurship and economics and money, things that aren't really taught that well in school at all. And so that's where the Tuttle Twins books could be helpful. And that's kind of what I think, most known for these days.
Yeah, interesting. Because it's quite interesting because I like to talk to individuals such as yourself and really these ideas of freedom and what tell us more about your ideas for talking to your kids about the ideas of freedom. What goes on in those conversations?
Well, when I first started figuring out how to do that, I had no clue. I turned to Amazon for help. I figured there's books on potty training and there's books on the birds and the bees. Surely there will be books about entrepreneurship and money and the like. And really came up short. There wasn't really anything great, hardly anything at all. And so that was actually the genesis of us doing these books, was to kind of fill that market void and say, let's actually try and do this. And it's very interesting. What I've discovered after doing this for 7, 8 years now with the Tuttle Twins is that kids can learn far more than we give them credit for. It's very fascinating to me how kids just really love these books, like really, really love them. And their parents will often share all these stories like, my kids hate reading, or they resist everything I try and get them to read, but they'll read these books. And that's happened so many times over the years. And so, focus groups and surveys and trying to talk to parents and figure out, why is this happening? Why do kids like learning about this type of stuff? And the leading theory is that, every kid wants to be like a big kid, and every big kid wants to be like an adult. And you have that kind of innate aspiration for, being part of the cool kids club and hanging with the people who are older than you. And so kids have that, but I think a lot of the educational material that they're subjected to meets them at their age. It treats them like a kid. And so, they find it boring. They find it irrelevant. They're not challenged. They're not intrigued. They're not enticed, and our books are not pulling punches. They're teaching real world big ideas. Yes, they're simplified. Yes, they're fully illustrated. Yes, it's a kid's book, but the ideas are very deep, and the words are very big, and they're complicated. I mean, we teach praxeology. No other kid's book talks about praxeology, the study of human behavior, or spontaneous order, or all these like economic terms. But through storytelling, it makes sense to kids, and they like learning about it. And so I've learned that the power of storytelling, it's just, the grease, the oil that just keeps everything lubricated. When you teach through story, it lands so much better. And I've learned the importance of actually taking time to talk to our kids about real world ideas that we might think, oh, when they're adults, these are adult ideas. I realized no, we can, and I think we should start when they're younger, give them a foundation, not worry that they're not going to understand because they want to, they like it, and we've kind of vetted that through our model is that they just crave some of these bigger so-called adult ideas.
Yeah, interesting. Because a number of my colleagues, they've actually niched down in this area of children's books, and it's always been fascinating to me. But there's actually a large market in what you're talking about through these storytelling and all of that. One thing is one thing that I have issues with the modern school system. I made it through, but it wasn't without pulling punches or anything. And shouldn't schools be teaching topics in your books such as entrepreneurship, free markets, money, independence, and more?
There are schools that do. My children are enrolled in one. It's a private school called an Acton Academy, started by an entrepreneur out of Austin, Texas, years ago, Jeff Sandifer. And so there are school models where they do teach this stuff. Now, the government schools that we like to call public schools, they do not. And if I'm putting on a tinfoil hat for a moment, I think a lot of the people who architected the modern public school system decades ago, they did not want to foster entrepreneurship and independent thinking. People like Horace Mann and John Dewey and some of these guys that were extremely influential in the early days of building the modern school system, they were collectivists, they were socialists, they wanted children to follow orders, they wanted them to be subordinated to the collective will, they wanted them to do what they were told. This, of course, matched very well with the economy of the time, because as the industrial era kind of came, the conveyor belt model, the Model T and everything else, right during the progressive era with all these schools coming online, it was seen as a great thing. Hey, we're training workers. They'll sit at their little part of the conveyor belt. They'll do what they're told. They won't go to the bathroom without permission. They'll be a team player. And we've moved past that. Our schools today continue to train kids for an economy that was around a century ago. They're not training them for today's economy, let alone a future one, and understanding the importance of flexibility and innovation and creative thinking and adaptability and all these things. I'll share a very brief story that maybe epitomizes this. Recently, a group was appointed by the president and his team to come together and analyze education in America. How's it going? How are the schools doing? Curriculum and all the rest. It was called the National Commission on Excellence in Education. And, they spent 18 months going across the country, holding public meetings, trying to understand how's it going. They produced this report called A Nation at Risk, in which they go on to say that there's a rising tide of mediocrity in America's educational performance that threatens to overwhelm our institutions. And that if an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the very mediocre educational performance that now exists today, we might have viewed it as an act of war. As it stands, we've done it to ourselves. Now, I must confess, I fibbed a little bit. I said that this was recent. This was not recent. This was done in 1983 when Ronald Reagan was the president. 40 years ago, this group felt at the time that we had a rising tide of mediocrity in America's schools. When I do public speaking, I often share this story, and I ask people like, who raise their hands? Anyone think that things have gotten better education-wise in the past 40 years? And no one typically is brave enough to raise their hand when I ask the question. So to me, for families, for your clients, listeners, everyone else who is interested in financial freedom and helping their kids understand these ideas and so forth, my message is we have to take that into our own hands. We have to, whether you're going to put them in a home, private school, or homeschool them, or keep them in public school, we have to realize that we can't delegate that to anyone else. These need to be family conversations. These need to be, discussions that we read books like the Tuttle Twins or whatever together, but we have discussions. We do it in the home because we can't assume that the school system is going to do it or do it well. They're not. It's up to us, and we shouldn't delegate that to anyone else to do a piss poor job if they even attempt it at all.
Yeah. I was reading, these ideas, and I was reading that the schools were designed to make us factory workers, like just basically push us in the factories. And then when you had professions like law and medicine and engineering, people went into those because those were more knowledge and professional. But it's still, these professions have still become, what you call indentured servitude. So what is interesting here, we can like we have to take our financial education in our own hands, because this is not taught in schools. They're still teaching us balancing a checkbook, etc. So one thing is there's this rising trend of homeschooling. Tell us more about that.
Well, we definitely saw this during COVID, when everyone was suddenly a homeschooler for a couple of weeks when they shut the schools down. And but post COVID, homeschooling has tripled. There are over 5 million kids in America who today are being homeschooled. This has remained a consistent thing. And I think a lot of parents are very, very fed up with some of the problems we've discussed. They've seen that the schools are not doing a good job for their children, and they want the best for their children. They want them to rise above and excel and have these wonderful lives and not be stuck drowning in a so-called rising tide of mediocrity that 40 years ago these people observed were happening. And so homeschooling is exploding. You have a lot of what are called homeschool co-ops, cooperatives. These are families coming together and supporting one another in their community, putting on field trips and activities, sharing classes where like different parents can just teach a class based on their expertise. And so, a doctor could go teach, biology or medicine or human anatomy or whatever. And so a lot of the parents kind of volunteer and teach one another's kids based on their knowledge, expertise, which works really well. And through online learning and all Khan Academy and all these different resources online, it's never been easier, especially with remote learning. A lot of parents have better been able to accommodate homeschooling because they can work while their kids are learning at home, and they can kind of together just be at home. The kids are doing an online thing, or they're at a class at their co-op, while the parents are getting some work done. So things have just completely changed post COVID, and the trend is not reversing. If anything, it's we're seeing more and more families come out to homeschool, and I frankly think that that's a good thing, because I think that more direct, individualized approach is far superior for the families who can actually accommodate it. It's far superior for the kids. The outcomes are staggeringly significant. Every test that's been done pitting public school kids against homeschool kids, the homeschool kids always beat them, and it's no surprise. And so I'm a huge evangelist for it. We homeschooled our kids for a decade. It's something that I think all families should seriously evaluate and consider if they can do it. Just because I think it ultimately is going to be better for most kids out there who, especially if you're entrepreneurial or creative thinker, you got ADHD or all these things, right? It's very hard to sit at a desk, memorize what you're told. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Okay, big whoop. Maybe a doctor like you needs to know that, right? But a guy like me probably never needed to learn that.
Yeah.
Or the quadratic equation, or all these things crammed in our head. And I was the kid who would raise my hand and say, why are we learning this? And they, put your hand down. It's on the test. That's why. So I think a lot of kids struggle with that model, and homeschooling is just an opportunity for a lot of those kids to thrive in an environment that is better suited to them.
Yeah. A couple questions on homeschooling is for you see in terms of college admissions. I know a lot of Gen Z are electing not to go to college because they feel like it's a waste of time and resources. But when you graduate homeschool, do you see admission to some of the more selective colleges, same, equal footing, higher, less? What is
It's mixed. Some universities really welcome and even court homeschoolers. They see them as, exemplary individuals who have a little bit more moxie and ambition in a lot of cases than the kids who've just been on a conveyor belt for a decade and, are part of the factory system already. So there's schools out there that welcome it and encourage it. There are others that are ambivalent but have created a pathway for it. So like, oh, hey, if you're an applicant who's homeschooled, here's what we want to see from you. And there are others that are still kind of stuck in their ways of, you must have a high school diploma, but it's mixed. And to your exact point, a lot of homeschoolers elect not to go to college because they homeschooled, or their parents homeschooled them because of the resistance to the conveyor belt approach to learning. And so why go back onto the conveyor belt or do that when that's not really your thing? Much like homeschooling is flourishing, so too are alternatives to college, whether it's code camps to learn how to become a programmer, right? Apprenticeships like Praxis, where you can just get right into the job market if you want to do, marketing or business development or sales or whatever. Certainly, if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, you gotta, do your time and go through the process. But for a lot of kids, it's the world has never been more abundant with opportunity to explore different pathways that will save them time, money, indoctrination, if you will. And there's a lot of pluses to schools, to college. It's not that I think they're inherently problematic, but as with all things, there are trade-offs, and you have to balance those trade-offs. And so my pitch and plea to parents is just, let's have an introspective, intentional conversation about what's best, rather than just assume, oh, this is what I did when I was a kid and I turned out fine, right? Things are a little different than they were decades ago. And so I think we owe it to our kids to figure out, like, is the path we went through really the best for our kids?
Yeah. And the other question I had is in with the, even though you have school and these academic programs that are with different intentions and all of that, what about for example, like socialization, learning how to work together, communicate, teamwork, all of that?
Yesterday, I was speaking with BJ Fogg, who's the author of the book Tiny Habits. He teaches out of Stanford, done a lot of research on habits. And he and I were talking because I saw him speak a few weeks ago, and he shared how he was doing this project with his students at Stanford that was a collaborative model. They were evaluated together. They had to rely on one another and really, pull their own weight. And the students loved it and started communicating to Professor Fogg that they never had that experience really before, that their entire educational track has been one of ruthless individuality, you might say, right? No sharing, because that's cheating, right? No collaboration, no nothing. You're on your own. You must do this all yourself. And he was perplexed by that, because he's like, the real world is not that way at all. Like, your success depends on your collaboration and teamwork and ability to do things. So I love this question that you ask, because to me, it's exactly opposite of what most people assume. Most people assume that the schools are a good environment for socialization and are preparing kids for the real world. I don't think that that's true. I think, as Professor Fogg has seen, BJ Fogg, these kids that go through the school system are not being prepared that way. And if anything, the socialization that's happening on school campuses, I think, is extremely toxic. When you look at bullying and sexual abuse and profanity and vulgarity, disrespect of teachers, physical violence, like all these things, as for me as a dad, when I think about how I might want my kids to be so-called socialized, do I want to place them in a toxic environment just so they toughen up and learn that that's how the real world, like, kids see more physical violence on a school campus than they ever will in their life. And so why would I want to subject personally my son, my kids to that environment? The counter argument would be, well, if you're homeschooled, you're not going to be socialized. My kids are going all over. They're interacting with adults. They're in a homeschool co-op with other friends. There's zero bullying at all because parents are there and there's more meaningful contact. We're going out on field trips and getting behind the scenes tours with entrepreneurs. They're asking these people questions. They're participating in kids markets, like farmers markets, where they're like interacting with customers and learning entrepreneurship. Like, it's a myth from decades ago for anyone to think that through homeschooling you aren't socialized. If anything, I think in a lot of respects it's superior, and I think the socialization that happens in our school campuses is very inferior, if not counterproductive, to what we want good humans to become. That's another reason why I think that intentionality and introspection is needed, to say, well, wait a minute, like, with what's going on today, is that the right environment? And if not, where else might be?
Yeah, very fascinating discussion. Really, a lot of excuse me, a lot of school campuses, they we have to worry about, whether our kids are physically safe and all of that. And you really point out some very good points. So I know a lot of people are interested from this discussion. How can they follow you on social media, contact you, visit your website?
Well, thanks. It's been a great conversation. I could be on the soapbox for hours. This is a topic that I get really fired up about. But the conversation's good. Hopefully it sparks some curiosity for a lot of your listeners. I'm easy to find. Connor Boyack. You can find me on social media. Google me, connorboyack.com. But more particularly, if you're a dad, a grandparent, an uncle, and you want to foster some conversation in your home or with the little ones in your life about financial freedom and political freedom, economic freedom, all the freedoms, would invite you to go to TuttleTwins.com, Tuttle, TuttleTwins.com. We've got books for teenagers, for toddlers, for kids of every age in between. We have a cartoon, we have a game, we have curriculum, we have a podcast of our own. We have all kinds of resources to empower those families to have conversations about real world ideas that matter. Great Christmas gifts, by the way, some good stocking stuffers, but TuttleTwins.com is where it's at.
Excellent. And for all the audience out there listening, Connor's resources will be in the links and show notes. So thanks so much. Be sure to follow him on social media, check out his books. And with that, thanks for coming on to the podcast. And we really appreciate your wisdom.